Hello, everybody, and happy Friday. Have a wonderful guest today. It is Jenora Ledbetter, who is the CEO and founder of Self Care Network. Jeff is taking his kid to college today, so it's just going to be the three of us. But nonetheless, we're super excited to have you, Jenora, and want to know what's on your mind.
Thank you. What's on my mind right now? Honestly, it's how often leaders don't realize that they're losing their best people until it's too late. It's not just losing them to other jobs, but it's losing their engagement, their creativity, their trust long before they ever hand in a resignation. So that's the quiet drain on organizations that's keeping me up at night right now.
And I want to ask you on that, Janora, is that industry specific? Is it everywhere? Are you seeing it creeping up somewhere? What do you see?
It is everywhere. It really is. Um, the truth is that employees are leaving organizations because they're burnt out more so than ever, especially right now. A lot of employees, they're losing their spark, they're losing their voice, they're losing that trust in their organization that they work for. And it's across the board.
And is there been a change in who and what has changed? Is it a change in the way that organizations are treating people? Is it a change in people's understanding of what they should and shouldn't put up with? Like what do you feel like has changed?
I think that organizations mostly measure loss through turnover numbers. So if someone quits, then that's when it's a problem. But they don't really notice that the problem is beforehand. People start checking out a year, 2 years before they even resign. And I think that it's really important that the smartest organizations are really looking into that, and they're really figuring out ways to create inclusive environments and looking at ways on how we can make sure that we're managing people effectively.
So when you say looking into that, right, what metrics can they read a year or two ahead of time to see, something is going south?
So a lot of the metrics that they can read could just be any type of conflicts that are being reported to their human resource departments. So if you have employees that are coming in and they're reporting either that they're feeling they're being discriminated against, whether it's race, whether it's age, or there's a particular supervisor that is getting a lot of complaints, those are warning signs to kind of start paying attention.
Yeah, but I feel like there's this, I feel like there's this trend or just natural desire to rationalize, particularly amongst leaderships. And when you were talking before, it remind me of a story of, you were saying like people have sometimes been ready to leave for years or months or whatever. But actually, I remember many years ago going into a CEO's office and I'm saying, you need to watch out because you're going to have all these people leaving. And he goes, I said, 10% of the company has left this summer. This was like 20 years ago or something. You got to watch out. And I was a pretty junior person and he just wanted me to be not complaining. And he thought I was making it worse by pointing it out or whatever. And he said, no, but so-and-so left because they got a better job and so-and-so left because, of this other reason, they wanted more flexibility with their family, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, those are the things that they told you why they were leaving. And you're just accepting that that's the whole story when they're just trying to leave and not break it, burn any bridges. And I feel like that, like rationalization, also extends to the day to day when somebody is complained against or whatever. Is that something that you're seeing as well?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a trend where leaders rationalize losing people. They might say, oh, she or he just wasn't a culture fit, or we're going in a different direction, instead of really asking the harder questions. So, the harder questions that they need to ask themselves is what in our culture or in our leadership made it easy for them to walk away. And if they get into that mindset, it helps them understand how to retain employees.
And when you look into their cultures, right, what are the frequent examples of what makes people say goodbye, even if the company doesn't want to admit? But what do you see?
Oh my God, yes. First thing that I see is they don't have a supportive supervisor. Also, too, people are feeling invisible. So, for example, you've got high performers whose ideas get ignored. Someone else might repeat them or repeat their ideas, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, that's great," but they completely ignore that the other person said it. Or they're in companies where they only want to hear from leadership when something's wrong. And so over time, what happens is employees stop trusting the organization. They stop trusting the supervisors and the people that they report to. They stop speaking up, and they stop going that extra mile. And then eventually what happens is they just stop showing up at all.
Yeah. Do you also see, and this is something I also remember, is like when there are people who are exhibiting bad behavior, but for some reason they are protected by the CEO, or they're so smart, we just accept it or whatever. And I feel like that people who are checked out or have bad behavior or whatever and aren't being called out by their leadership is extremely demoralizing for people who are trying to, just get their jobs done, or who are going the extra mile and feeling like that person's getting rewarded for bad behavior. Why should I put in the extra mile?
Yeah, definitely in some organizations, there are employees whose behavior is very harmful to the culture, but they are protected because either they're bringing in big revenue, they might have seniority, or they have a close relationship to leadership. So when those people aren't called out, it sends this very loud message that bad behavior is tolerated if you're valuable enough. And so that's when you start to see that trust erode and that morale starts to go down. And the good people, they start planning that quiet exit.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you a question on scaling, right? Because interestingly, when businesses start scaling and when these big results start coming in, culture sometimes takes the back seat, right? Because the organization needs to deal with growth. They're pushing for more growth, deliver. All bets are off. Have you seen examples like that? And what can business people, founders, CEOs, functional managers, right, executives, what can they do to protect that culture and therefore protect their best workforce?
Yeah, when organizations focus on scaling the business, culture does take a back seat, because they're basically at that point they're building speed without steering the wheel. So the company might grow fast, but they're also multiplying cracks in their foundation. And so when I say foundation, they're multiplying cracks in trust and communication and leadership. And so those cracks are going to cost these organizations more than what the growth brought in. So scaling works best when you are growing the culture alongside the business so that people don't get lost in the process.
Yeah, I can't remember there was a book that I read a few years back, and I can't remember which one it was, but it was all talking about the fact that there are these sort of levels when it's going from like 5 to 15, and then 15 to 50, and 50 to 150, like there's these big changes. And a lot of what I think that they were talking about is those interpersonal relationships scale. I don't know if it's exponentially, but it's much faster than linearly, because every new person you bring on has the potential to have or has a relationship potentially with every other person who's been there before. So every time you add somebody new, those cracks can be like amplified. So you have that bad behaving person, and now they can have bad behavior towards 50 people instead of 25 or 150 people or whatever it is, right?
Right. And when an organization scales, it's also that they're introducing new layers of management. They're introducing these new processes. And like you said, often new people from the outside. So that does change how the relationships work. And now suddenly the person you used to grab lunch with, they're now your boss.
Mm.
And there's that awkward, how do we manage that? Or it could be that decisions are filtered through layers instead of just one way like before. So if leadership doesn't intentionally help people navigate these shifts, you get the silos, you're going to get the mistrust, and you're going to get that loss of inclusion that made that culture strong in the first place.
And when you say management needs to help them, right? What should the manager do? Like specific steps, right? Because there's scaling going on. Everybody is running to growth. There's not enough people. We're hiring in a hurry. We forgot half the people's names. What does management do? Like, what should they stop and focus on?
Well, first, management has to lead the way in protecting people through change. So I always tell leaders to think about it in 4 different steps. Naming the changes out loud, or as I say, naming the purple elephant out loud. And it's just, don't let people guess. Explain what's shifting and why so that no one's blindsided. Number 2, reinforce trust. So you want to show that you're still listening and that you're valuing contributions even as structures are changing. Number 3, you want to protect the connections. So you want to create opportunities for cross teams and cross level relationships to stay strong. And number 4, you want to check in, but you don't want to check out. So having regular one-to-ones with the people that you're supervising to spot early signs of burnout and frustration and disengagement.
This is just, as you're talking, I was thinking about this, does scaling tend to exacerbate problems with whether it's discrimination against, either minorities or women or whatever? Does that tend to cause more of those problems, or does it just tend to be a question of if it were there and hidden, it's now just like does that kind of end up also do women end up who may have been doing really well when in a smaller company, as it scales, suddenly sort of misogynistic tendencies or whatever come out of the woodwork? Or is that just a result of, I'm just curious whether that's just a question of whether it's the company by company thing, or is that something that actually is a known problem?
Yeah, it can, absolutely. When organizations scale quickly, hiring ramps up, and then layers of management are added really fast. And if there isn't a clear equity and inclusion framework in place, what happens is that biases start to slip in. And the biases are who's getting promoted, whose ideas are getting heard, how are policies being applied, and the speed of the growth can magnify existing inequities without intentional checks. And so then discrimination can become baked into the culture before anybody notices.
Yeah,
Right.
So if I can jump in with one follow-up on that, is that a company that I was at, we had this conversation about the fact that we kept going to the same sources to hire people as we were growing. And as a result of going to the same sources, we just kept getting the same people, same sort of people with similar academic backgrounds, people with, from the same area of the country, whatever it was, because it was a biotech company. So it was coming from the same labs. And that's like a sort of pernicious undercurrent of where I think some of that I don't think it's like malicious bias, but it's sort of like bias that ends up happening because you're kind of just keep going back to the same place. So you're going to get the same results.
Yeah, they end up hiring people who think, look, and work alike. And that's comfortable, right, at first, right? Because we have this need to be around people who are similar to us. So at first it's comfortable. But what it does ultimately is it's going to limit innovation within the organization. It's going to reinforce blind spots, and it is going to send messages to others that you don't have a path here.
Yeah, absolutely.
That makes sense. I want to ask you about another major force in business today, of course, and it is AI, right?
AI.
Introducing all kinds of commotion, meaning, yay, we have to implement AI. Are we enabled to implement AI? We'd better be enabled and implement AI. We want efficiencies, and people are scared and they don't know what's going on. So there is, at this stage, it's a lot of commotion, right? So do you see that in any way impacting how employees are reacting and what kind of choices they're making, or not particularly?
In which way do you mean exactly?
Scared that this organization is going to go all AI first and eliminate roles. Therefore, I'll go find another organization. Or demands in terms of, tech stack are unreal. So I better get out of here. Anything along these lines.
I think it's twofold. I think AI creates a lot of excitement because people can work smarter, not harder. They have systems that they can use. I always say, though, with AI, you've got to know the basics of what you're putting in. Like, you can't just put something in and expect it, because half the time it'll come out wrong. Like, you really have to guide and almost train AI yourself. So if you don't have those foundations, you're going to be producing and probably send your boss a wrong report with wrong data. But yes, to answer your question, there is a lot of fear at the same time. They can implement it, but I think it really matters on how they do it. If organizations and leaders are rolling it out with transparency, employees might feel like they're being, not with transparency, if they're doing it without transparency, employees might feel like they're being replaced, or they can also deal with that feeling that their work is being undervalued. But also on the flip side, if you involve employees early and you train them on how AI can make their work easier and show that it's a tool, not a threat, then you can boost productivity and trust at the same time.
Absolutely. Okay, so I have one thought that I've had, and I feel like, Elena, like maybe even like a year ago, we had a similar conversation. I asked a similar question about the generations. Like, do you see a difference in the way that, like, the Gen Zs versus the millennials versus the Gen Xs? Is there a difference? And just love to hear your take on that piece.
Yeah, right now we've got 5 generations in the workforce at once. So it's a challenge and it's an opportunity. I do work with a lot of clients that talk about how the different generations, how they each work differently. And so the challenge is that each generation has different communication styles, different expectations for leadership, and they also have different views on work-life balance. So what happens is, if leaders default to managing in a one-size-fits-all way, they're going to risk alienating a whole group of employees. And so the opportunity is to intentionally bridge those gaps. And they have to learn how to leverage the experience of older generations and also leverage the experience of the fresh perspectives of younger ones, so that they can build a stronger, more adaptable culture.
Absolutely. So, we're coming to the sort of 20-minute mark. Elena, I don't know if you want to throw some ChatGPT questions at Jenora.
Yes. So we have some obscure and some thought-provoking ones for you, Jenora. Which would you like to take on first?
Okay, I'll do the thought-provoking first.
Okay, so here we go. This is a good thought-provoking one. 1 second. If an organization is in denial about its purple elephants, what's the most effective way, in your opinion, to break through that resistance? It's a very nice question. Good
It's
question.
a
That's like a
good
very
one.
thoughtful
Mhm.
If they're in denial,
Oh, yeah.
what's the best way to help
As
them
if
break
you
free?
have never met those who are in denial.
I was going to say, isn't that just
There's
about
got to be
every?
like half of them in denial.
So yeah, so the purple elephants are those unspoken issues that everyone feels but no one names. And the first thing that I do is create a safe, non-judgmental space to surface them. So that means leaders have to ask real questions. They have to be willing to hear uncomfortable answers without shutting them down. And from there, what I do is I start with small, visible actions that show that I'm addressing what people raise. So the moment employees see that you're actually listening to them, that you're actually making changes, trust starts to build. And that's when the real conversation really starts to begin.
Yeah. So now you got an obscure one, and I kind of think it's pretty thought provoking too. So the question the Chat GPT 5, by the way, asked was, have you ever seen an industry where culture matters more than strategy?
Oh.
That's a good question.
It
That's
is. It's interesting, or
Yeah.
maybe not more, but equally as much. And now I'm thinking, if I sat in your shoes, I'd be like, what are like I think the places that rely on culture are going to be very like heavy customer support type organization. Random guess. What do you think?
Yeah, I've absolutely seen industry culture matter more than strategy. But I feel like you can have the best strategic plan on paper, but if the culture of the industry, if it's high pressure, or if the culture is resistance to change, or they're built on outdated norms, it's gonna clash with what direction they're trying to go in.
Like,
I
what industries do you see it in?
Specifically nonprofits. They are really good at focusing on culture within their organization and building that soil so that their strategy has room to grow. I feel like nonprofits, and I work with a lot of them. I actually used to, before I opened up my own business, that's where I got my start. I worked in nonprofits as an employee. And so the thing with them is that they understand that if the soil is toxic, the strategy won't take root no matter how brilliant it is. So they would, when working with them, they really do focus on that culture, but they focus on the culture to make sure that their strategy also has room to grow within the culture.
Wow.
So-
I say 2 for Lenora and 0 for GPT in this
Jenora.
conversation, right?
Good job, Jenora. So actually, I wanted to ask, because you were talking about your clients a little bit. How do you work? How do you like? Who comes to you? How do you get engaged? How do you work with clients? And obviously, don't reveal anything that you're not supposed to reveal. But I would love to hear something. Yeah.
Most of my clients come to me when they know that something's not working, and they can't name it. So I work with a lot of clients that are beginning to see that high turnover. They're starting to see disengagement from their employees, or they're seeing conflict at the leadership level. And they've already tried those surface fixes that didn't work. And so they come to me to help them diagnose that root issue, that purple elephant in the room. And then I help them build a practical step-by-step plan to address it.
Do you ever get people who are sort of companies that are self-aware enough to like engage you before it gets to that point where it's kind of like it's already a real, like, presumably by the time it comes to you in most of those cases, it's way past due? Is that...
I do.
Yeah.
I do, but it's rare. The majority of organizations call me when the cracks are already showing. But every so often, I do get a leader who's so self-aware, and they'll say, Jenora, we're doing well now, but I can feel tension building and I don't want it to get worse. Those are my favorite clients to work with because we can be proactive, right? We can strengthen that culture before people start walking out the door.
Absolutely. So Hey, there's a scenario that came to mind that I just want to get your take on, because sometimes companies have to behave like companies, and sometimes that's at odds. Whether it needs to be or not is a totally different conversation, but that is at odds with the people, and that might come in terms of like a need to lay people off or let people go, and then you can't, like, there's this sort of natural break where the leadership knows something that's going to have a negative impact or a major impact, at least, whether it's an acquisition or whatever. What's the right way to deal with those scenarios where they can't talk about it, but you also need to maintain trust? Like, that just seems like that's a hard balance. And I'm sure you have thoughts on
that. So when an organization has to make a tough decision, and that could be layoffs, I personally believe that the right approach is transparency and dignity and care. You can't control that people will be upset, but you can control whether they feel blindsided or disposable. So that does mean communicating early and explaining the why behind the decision. Offering real support, like career transition resources, is really important. And also making sure that the people who are remaining at the organization understand what the plan is going forward. So being very transparent about that. And once an organization starts getting used to that, then these moments become easier for them, and it just becomes part of their culture DNA.
And do you ever get hired in moments like that, or most of the time you are hired afterwards to deal with the, to clean up the shambles? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yes, I do get hired in moments like that. Sometimes right before, but often right after. Leaders will bring me in when they realize that a big decision like layoffs has caused distrust and instability of their teams. And so what my role is to rebuild transparency. It's to reestablish that connection and to make sure the culture doesn't unravel. So ideally, I'm involved early enough to help shape the process so that people leave with dignity, and those who are staying are feeling secure and they're feeling valued.
So one other thought that occurs to me that is, and I've experienced this both personally, and also as a manager in the past, where a worker at a company has a lot going. I mean, we all have lives, right? There's even this sort of notion that you should treat everybody at work as if, something really serious is going on and that you don't know about in their life outside the company. And that's probably a good, kind of piece of advice, because probably in many, many cases, if not all cases, it's probably true, right? So you're going through a health issue, or a parent is having problems, or your kids are struggling, or there's a relationship issue or whatever that's going on outside of work, and you're coming into work, and obviously that's going to impact. So how does an organization play that balance properly, where you're supporting people, but obviously you can't, like, it's not the company's job to take care of those problems, but at the same time, they can end up affecting people's days. Sometimes not even the person who is,
Right.
could be affecting the employees under that person, or whatever, or the boss of that person. What's the right way for organizations to think about that dynamic?
Yeah, every employee has a whole life outside of work. And I think you never know what someone is carrying. Like you said, you brought up examples of a sick parent, financial stress. They can have their own health struggles. I think organizations have to balance compassion with accountability. And so that means building a culture where people feel safe enough to speak up when they need support, and where managers are trained to respond with empathy and flexibility and not suspicion. So you can't solve every personal challenge that every employee has, but you can create an environment where people don't have to choose between doing their job and taking care of their life.
Right. So one other question I have, and we are coming up against the half an hour, but I'm going to go over a little bit anyway. Politics in companies are rampant. I remember being a new startup, and I remember somebody saying the words, "We don't even have any politics here. It's great." And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, which I guess was political on my part, going, "You're damn straight. We have some politics going on. It's just that we're like small enough and we can handle it, so that we're just trying to get, this company off the ground or whatever it is." But like, what is the source of those politics? What is the antidote to those politics? Like, it happens almost everywhere that those politics are there, and they can get pretty toxic.
And I'd build on that question and say, and could you turn them constructive?
There's a shift. And some are calling it this big boss era, where CEOs are pushing back against the office politics, such as like flexibility and leaning into greater productivity and tighter policies, less emphasis on work-life balance. Like those are the office politics. I think really the thing that happened is that the return to office mandate made things very uncomfortable for people. The pullback on DE&I efforts have made things in the office uncomfortable. And so I think it's really important when dealing with office politics, defining how political discussions are discussed. And when we talk about politics, it's really not just office politics. Politics of what's going on in the world is starting to come into the office spaces, right? And we are living in this day and age where people want to feel connection. They want to feel like they're able to talk about this because the things that are going on in the world are affecting people in real time. Yeah. And so right now, I've worked with an organization to define when and how politics are discussed, how they're monitored, if they're acceptable, to make sure that they're managing, protecting everybody's comfort, making sure that they're not crossing legal rights, but also being able to have conversations where people are being able to express what's going on, but not being fearful that those conversations are going to escalate into a bigger issue.
Absolutely. Well, Jenora, this has been a fascinating conversation. And as I mentioned before we got on the air, that after the half an hour, which we're a little bit over, but thank you for willing to bear with us. Sometimes we push the envelope, but we always like to go around and ask everyone to share one thing they want to leave the audience with. And what I don't warn you about is that I always make the guest go first. It's kind of a mean hazing thing that I do, right? So Jenora, what's one thing that you'd like to leave our audience with?
That's a good one. Well, if they remember nothing else from this conversation, I want them to remember, you don't lose people when they walk out the door. You lose them the very moment that they feel unseen, unheard, or undervalued. So your job as a leader is to notice and act before that moment ever comes.
Great point, Jenora. Thank you. Now, before I go, we got to make sure that our audience can find you. So the question is, where could people get in touch with you?
Yes, they can get in touch with me on my website, which is www.theselfcarenetwork.org.
Awesome. Thank you. Great. And for my take, I am going to second you and say, if people are walking out of the door and if you are seeing open conflicts in the organization, it's too late. You got to look at it proactively, and you always have to say, no matter what my growth goals are, no matter what my tech goals are, no matter what my business goals are, I have to keep my culture and my people in the line of sight. Because if you just do that, you probably will see the issue earlier and do something about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's where find it. When you find the problem early, then you should call Jenora and have her come in and help you. So my one thing that I want to leave with is I want to go back to this part of the conversation that we had maybe towards the beginning about scaling. I think that is really an interesting and important issue where culture does get kind of can get lost in the shuffle, and you really have to be extremely mindful about how you grow your organization. And I talk about 5, 50, 100 people companies. I've never been personally, I've always worked at small companies. So I can only imagine what this looks like when we're talking about the scaling from a couple hundred to a couple thousand, probably goes even more sideways. But I really think the scaling and how you maintain that culture and maintain that ability to keep listening to each other, and particularly the leadership maintaining that ability to listen sounds like it is absolutely essential, and probably why we get a lot of stories that don't end up as happy as they could. So, Jenora, thank you so much for joining us. This was a fascinating conversation. Definitely gave me a lot to think about. So thank you for joining us.
Likewise.
Thank you.